Hey everybody, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about what a tile map is and how we would make them and why, so that we can use them in game development. This image here is an example of a tile set. I believe it's free to download off of opengameart.org, but it was used in an example in Unity. And this is just a picture of the tile palette within Unity. All of these little bits here, every square, is a piece that we could use to sort of paint our world and fill it up with details so that when we're making a level in a game environment or a big expansive world, that we don't have to worry about making very large art assets that are going to take up a lot of memory, maybe be difficult to create, maybe be difficult to display on the screen. So this is an example of what a tile set looks like. I have a whole folder full of examples here that we're going to quickly pop through and take a look at. Some of them are a little bit crazier, but I'll try to talk through each one of these as we go. So let's start at the opposite side of this folder. So here we've got Super Mario World, where we can see there are platforms that the characters are standing on and the enemies are spawning from, as well as a background, and then these individual blocks, which are the mainstay of that game series. And each one of these is constructed out of repeating pieces. So you can almost imagine how every one of these grass platforms with the dirt is the same thing, just we have a corner. We have a center tile that is repeated. You can see the same sort of features over and over and over. And then a left-hand corner over here. And that's the same on this top platform, this one, and also on the ground down here. Then because they're stacking, we have tiles that are going to represent the sides of the dirt, the center of the dirt, the alternate where the, I guess he's a mole, is popping out from. And then we might have a different one where it connects to the ground or not, depending on how the tiles are chopped up. It's very easy to imagine how the blocks are chopped up because they are already squares. And so using that set of pieces, we can build this game world in addition to typically a larger piece of art for the background, which in this case is just big leafy cloud sorts of shapes. This is a template that I'm going to provide to my students, but it represents the bare minimum number of tiles that you would have to create, and it's not properly chopped up because it's going into Piscal. But if we had top, sides, and bottom, then this would be 9 different tiles, middle, left, and right, and then middle, left, and right for the center row, and middle, left, and right for the bottom. A single column, a single row, one standalone, and then these would be interior corners. Okay? This is an example of a more extensive tile set that has different material types to it. We've got grasses over here and some rocks and maybe some constructed masonry, as well as a number of different elements that would be used in the game world. I don't actually know what game this is from, but it was another free to download open source asset where we've got trees and fence posts and signs and little bits of foliage and things like that. Oftentimes a tile set for a game will just have a large atlas of all of these things kind of clustered together because it's easy on memory to save these in a single file. Or if you get these ripped from an existing game, someone might just arrange them this way so they're easier to view. I can only imagine what all of the functionality of each of these things is, but we can sort of say that this stalactite shape is probably a decoration inside of a cave, which might use these tiles, and also that this looks like 2 states of a single object, like an unbroken and broken version of a crate. So you can create objects as well as tiles if you want to within your tile set. You need solid objects to walk on and open air objects, which are usually not represented here. They just show the background. But you might also want interactable things such as hazards or doorways or pushable crates, and they can also be represented as a tile. Here's an assembled game world made from this tile set here. And so we can see the platforms, walls, and solid areas created by the tiles. This one has a few interesting things in that there are a lot of decorations, which are not interactable. And it also has this little underpass area, which is itself not interactable, but sort of explains why these things are floating in air, I suppose. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes to differentiate between what can be considered solid and not. In this case, it's a little tough to tell that this is supposed to be passed through, and that could be helped by lowering the contrast or changing the color somewhat. You might darken it, such as this area, or you might lighten it to look more in line with the background. But either way, we would read it as a tunnel, which right now it reads as solid. And we can see all of those different elements represented here on this tile set. Here's the underpass area as well as some of the variant tiles for fill. Here's the primary fill tile, which is just solid, and then the platforms are all represented here in various different ways. I don't really know what the purpose of the dark shape is over here. Oh, here's that one that I just saw in the tile set. But here we have like a void, like a black void, and I don't see that anywhere on here. I also don't know if it's meant to be a door, because these would essentially be solid tiles that you couldn't enter into. So I don't know why they would suddenly put a black shape there. It really attracts attention and it's kind of distracting, but I just wanted to point that out because it's something that you might end up doing in yours. This is a top-down view of Zelda for Super Nintendo. I think it was Link to the Past. And even a game as complicated as this is made up of lots of tiles. You can sort of tell in the flowers and grass and bushes, but when you look at the big rocky surface of this side cliff, it's a little tough to see it. Here is a different view of the same game with tiles represented, and you can see how the edge, center, and bottom of a cliff face are represented as 3 discrete tiles, and a sort of 3-dimensional effect is being achieved here by having different perspectives on these different walls, even though you could just jump down off of any of them. Here's a breakout of that tile set as well, where we can see all of the different pieces used in making this game. And they are pretty complicated sometimes, especially the trees, which represent a lot of different tile shapes. But because this is a very large game world with a lot of great art, sometimes using multiple tiles is necessary. We've got 4 for each one of these larger shapes here. Here's some of the breakout pieces from the game. Probably they would have been free of their grass typically in this game, and just rendered with transparency, but I'm not sure. I believe this was a rip from the game, so we might not be seeing it exactly the way that it was represented in the game world. Here's another example, nicely assembled, sort of darker castle shape. And here are some of the pieces that go into it. It's kind of an interesting way to display the tile set, but I believe that if you put this on a grid, it would still break out nicely into individual tiles. You can see top corner, sides, and receding into darkness, fill areas for this, and then some slopes, as well as slope for the darkness. Some interactable pieces. You can even animate tiles like these if you wanted to, torches flickering or waterfalls or things like that. But then you can see the background elements as well that we're running on top of, and different states for this door. Even though we don't see them in the example, they have the capability to provide different states for the door. Also, the character is represented right here. It's interesting to note that his feet are halfway into the floor here, which in a typical tile set would mean that you would have one tile beginning and ending here, but you would have another tile that extends above, which would probably be a part of this background or have transparency or something, because you typically want one tile to be completely solid and the next one to be completely free. But we can define our colliders however we want nowadays, especially in Unity, and so you could just put your collider slightly lower if you wanted to. I think that's a color variant version, I'm not sure. The idea of using a tile set to fill up a game world can be very interesting. These are pieces from Roller Coaster Tycoon 1, which was a 2-dimensional game that simulated the appearance of 3D. And these are all the slope representations for the grass. Here they are partially assembled so that you can kind of see how they will eventually stack up to create the full game world. And then here is the full game world, where you can see there is still grid on the ground because it is a strategy and building game, so you don't want to lose sight of that. But it's interesting to see how all of these things can build together to create a faux 3D effect, even in a fully 2-dimensional environment. Finally, I have Sonic sprites that were taken from some rip of the game. I believe this was the number 2 game, not the first one. But they're very big and they have very complicated shapes, and I'm not really sure why they did that or whether or not this is really the way their tile set worked in the game. But it's kind of interesting to think that in a game where you're supposed to run along smooth paths and create very interesting kind of roller coaster obstacles, that this might be the kind of tile set that you'd be dealing with in that case. But like I said, I don't know. So that brings us back around to this palette, the constructed version of this set that you can choose from and paint with in the game engine. In the next video, I'll show a basic working procedure for using Piskel to create some tile sets.